At the time of this recording, which is September 2018, Tara and I have both read over 100 books so far this year. So we thought it was a good time to record an episode about how we read so many books, how we find the time, how we pick books, and all those sorts of fun things. Welcome to today's episode of Take Care of Yourself with Tara and Joeli. I'm Joeli, and this is my friend Tara.
Hi.
And today we are talking about how we read so many books.
Okay, so I actually wrote about this back in 2013, and I'll link it up in the show notes, but I have lots of points to cover. I think one of my number one tip is stop reading when you don't like something. I feel like when my reading slows down, it's because I get stuck on a book that I don't actually like. And so I just am avoiding reading time. Whereas if I'm only reading books I'm super into, it's easy. I fly through them. What do you think? Do you give up on books?
Well, yes. Not permanently, but I feel like this is true with everything in my life. If I force myself to continue with a knitting project or with a book or with anything, I just lose interest and I don't want to do it. Or if I'm not enjoying it, I will... If I'm on a knitting project and I'm not enjoying it, I will just not knit rather than knit on the thing I don't enjoy. And I do agree that this is true for books. At any one time, I'm in the middle of probably 5 or 6 books that I've picked up, read a couple chapters, got excited by something else. I'm 100% agree with you on this.
Yeah, just let go of the ones that aren't great. But that whole point about having 5 books that you're in the middle of at one time is the second important thing, which is to have plenty of books, right? Because if you get stuck on one, if you don't like one, if you are one is a thriller and you're having a hard time falling asleep, or one is really boring and it keeps putting you to sleep, you need to have tons of books to read. So if you listen to our episode in season 2 about how we read, where we get books, I have tons of books from the library. You can see right here if you're watching the video. If you're watching the audio, you need to go to our YouTube channel, look at the video because it's insane. This is just from the library, and there are 2 books in here that I bought that I own. And this is what I currently have out. So I counted it up. There's 18 books here. And it's because I'm not going to read all of them. But if I'm going to read 6 to 10 books this month, I need more than that, because also I get nervous when I am running low and I'll slow down my reading because I'll be I don't have anything else to read. And there are times when there's nothing at the library, so then I search Amazon, I search Goodreads, I get recommendations from friends. I always have a standing waiting list at my library of books I'm waiting on that other people are reading, and then I also have books home waiting.
I'm looking at your stack of library books, and all I'm thinking about is that's about $30 in library fines for me waiting to happen.
Only if you don't go to the library once a week like I do. Right. So I will, going to the library is I need a break from today. I'm gonna, and the library is 5 minutes away. It's a 1.5 mile walk. So my hope is when we have kids in a stroller, that will be a walk that I take. Right now it's way too hot to walk anywhere. But that's my thing, is having plenty. And out of the stack, I'm reading these 3 were in my bedside table that I'm reading. This is The Power of the book you recommended. This is the book I'm most reading right now. So out of here, I'm reading 4 or 5. Some are my morning coffee reading. Some are my in bed, and some are my okay, the work day is over. I'm going to read a couple pages to stop myself from going back to the computer or the phone. Mm-hmm. But how about you? How do you have plenty of books all the time?
Yeah, I will say that when my kids were younger, we did go to the library because we went every week for story time or song and rhyme time. And the library is perfect for getting kids' books out because you don't need the newest release of the kids' books. You just need a selection. You don't want to always have the same book in your house forever because some of them are not enjoyable. So you just want to read them once and get rid of them. And then when you find the book that your kid fixates on, then you buy it. So yes, when my kids were younger, I was at the library every week and I did get books out for them and books out for me. Now that we're kind of in this routine of my kids are at school full time, I am now in an office. Like it's not that I don't have time because my husband goes every weekend. The library doesn't work for me. Although there is one like literally across the street from my office. It's the Manchester Central Library. And I was thinking I should pop in and just see what they have. But I go to the bookstore every week. Especially now that I'm in my office, the bookstore is about a 5 to 10 minute walk for me. And I like to go on a lunch break and browse. They have like 4 floors. And so I just browse and pick out books that look good. And also one of the guys who works the till likes to recommend books. Like when I buy a book, he's like, oh, if you enjoy this, you should get this other book. And they also have an app on your phone, which is like your loyalty card, but they have a wish list. So what I can do is if I'm in the store, I try not to buy like 50 books. I try to just buy 1 or 2. I can take a picture of the book and add it to my wish list in like their store app. And then I can order it and have it collect at the store in like 2 hours. So sometimes in the morning, I'll on a Friday morning, I'll order a book and then I'll walk down at my lunch and collect it. So that's kind of how I have so many books to read.
I love it. And usually, I mean, in the past, you've recorded from home in front of your like massive bookshelf that is full of books.
Yeah.
Like to be read, right?
Yes. I mostly have books that I haven't read. I must own like 100 books and I maybe have read like 20 of them. If I read a book and I don't think I'm going to want to reread it, I get rid of it. I donate it. I like the idea of just like leaving books that I've read in places for people to pick up. I was thinking at the office we should have a spot to like donate used business books because, but yeah, I buy more than I can read, and so I always have a collection and a wide variety of books, travel books and business books and nonfiction like self-help books and some fiction books. I always try to have like a good collection of books that I haven't read.
I love that. And I think that like what you said about your bookstore makes me totally understand why you go to the bookstore, because in our town, so we have a Barnes and Noble, but it's been taken over by Toys and Games. So my library actually has more books in it than my bookstore does.
Right.
And then there is one of the country's oldest independent bookstores in Asheville, which is like 45 minutes away. So whenever we go there, I try to buy a book from them, from my list, or, they have like a whole local author section and a whole they have book signings every week. And so I'll buy something from them because I want to support the independent bookstore. But there's like, honestly, the library just has like such a better selection. Plus it's connected to all the other libraries, so I can get anything. And it's just sad that my only bookstore is like a Barnes and Noble. It's basically a toy store. Like it's not no 4 levels of books. It's like dreamy.
Yeah. And they have like really, because we're in the city, they have like specialized books. So like when you browse like the film selection, like they have such a big selection, and we're also in a really big university town. So they'll have like some really just good quality books to choose from. And I think I'm such like a tactile person. Like I really just like browsing all the books and touching them. And I like, just reading the first chapter in the bookstore, deciding if I want it or not. Like I just love the whole experience of being in a bookstore. It makes me so happy.
So I think that's the second thing about reading a lot is having plenty of selection, and also like 2B is like having a way of getting books that is pleasurable for you. Mm-hmm. So like if you love online shopping, like Amazon might be the answer. And if you like love like a big selection, either the library or bookstore. But I think that's like a step. The whole like falling in love with a process is a step that people miss, right?
Yeah.
So like they'll be like, well, I want to read more, but I don't know any good books. Well, like go and explore. Like that's you have to first like have a bunch of books you want to read before you're going to read a lot.
Right. Like I often, like if you asked me now, like, oh, what's the next book you're going to read? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't have a running list of books like that I've planned to read in the future. Like I go to the bookstore with no intentions at all. I just have favorite sections in the bookstore and I just browse like what catches my eye today. Sometimes they put out displays and I just, browse the displays. Like it's whatever catches my eye, and that I like that. And I think if my library was like the size of my bookstore, I might go to the library. But my library, like the business section is like small accountant 101, self-employment for dummies, like, and it's like 10 bucks. It's the worst. And I'm like, that's not a pleasurable experience for me to go through.
No, you need to go to the big one that you're across from now, the big Manchester one, because I bet that one will be awesome.
Right.
Definitely. You mentioned like with kids, it's like it was fun to go to the library when they were smaller. Mm-hmm. And I know that's like the pushback I get the most often. People are like, well, of course you read a lot. You don't have kids. And I'm like, look at Joeli. She's read more books than me. She has 2 children that are not like low maintenance kids. No. Like, so tell me, how do you read so much with kids?
I read all the time. Like whenever I have a spare minute, I am reading, and I read more than I watch TV, and I read more than I watch YouTube or Netflix. And that's not like, I'm not judging. I'm just saying, like, if you want to know how much I read, like why I read so much, I read in all those moments when people are wasting time, when I'm on the train and no one else is reading, like I am reading a book. Like, and I think I also read aloud to my kids. So my oldest was having trouble falling asleep the other night. And so I was like, all right, climb in my bed, but I'm reading. And so I read out loud the membership economy to him, and he learned about creating membership platforms. But I was like, I'm reading, you're here, I'm just going to read aloud. So I think it's about just like, I like my kids to see me reading. I make them read for 30 minutes a day or 20 to 30. And whether that means looking at a comic book or whether that means they're looking at like a Minecraft, like how-to guide, or whether they're actually reading a book with words, I don't care, but they have to look at something. And so kind of having that family reading time. And the last thing, I don't read fast, but I don't get distracted when I'm reading. So I recently read the first 5 Harry Potter books in 48 hours for that challenge on Instagram. And people are like, how do you read so much?
24 and 48?
Yes, that's what it was, yeah.
Every time they do it, I'm going out of town. I was out of town that weekend, and I was so, like, upset because I wanted to. So you guys can look at hashtag the numbers 24 in 48, and the challenge is to read 24 hours out of 48 hours.
Right. So I spent a Saturday and Sunday just like all day reading. My kids thought it was hilarious. And I read the first 5 Harry Potter books. And I think by like timing it, like I timed every book, I think I read like 100 pages an hour. So if most books are 300 to 400 pages, if I read 2 hours a day, I'm pretty much reading like 2 books a week. And so that's easy way to get 100 books out in a year. Now, obviously, I'm at like 110 so far, so I've exceeded that. I've read some books which are shorter, some 200, 250 pages books. But yeah, I just read a lot. Like, so I read 2 hours a day because right now I'm on the train for an hour to work and an hour home. But even on the days where I'm at home, that's the first thing I do. I just read for an hour. Like I get up, I've been getting up at 7 lately, and my kids get up about 8. So I have like an hour in the morning to just read, or I get them, like I will literally be reading and like pouring out their cereal, and like that's just like sacred time. It's like an hour in the morning I'm going to read, and an hour before bed. If I haven't, gotten enough reading time in, or if I'm really into a book, I go to bed right after my kids go to bed, which is 9 o'clock, and I read from 9 till 10 or 10:30 or 11. It's just like about prioritizing it, I guess.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of the going to bed early and reading. Last night I went to bed because Jay and I were we were like trying to watch something together and it wouldn't load on Hulu. And so I was like, well, let me go to the bathroom, wash my face. And like, I came back out and he was watching a live sportsing thing. I think it was the Red Sox. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to go to bed. And he's like, no, we can watch it. And I was like, I'm actually not upset. I'm like super into this novel. So like, this makes me really happy. Bye.
Yeah.
And it was like 9:15 and I got into bed and then he came to bed an hour later and I was still reading. And then, I still went to bed turned off the light by like 10:45. And I was like, this is a solution to all my problems. And it's just to get into bed early and like, no matter how busy the day is, there's still that time. You said no matter what your kids are reading, like just something reading. And that is the big thing. You commented on about so we both keep track of our reading on Goodreads. It's how we know how many books we've read. You mentioned you don't keep track of it. Do you not have a to be read list on Goodreads? Okay, so I keep track of any book anybody recommends on Goodreads. It doesn't mean I'm gonna read it. It's just like, oh, that might be interesting. So that way when my list falls or my stack falls low, I will just like scroll back, request some of them from my library, buy some of them from Amazon, look at go down a rabbit hole of if you liked this, you might also like this. And if I didn't have it on Goodreads, I wouldn't, because I don't have the great bookstore to browse. Yeah. And like my library, it has more books than my bookstore, but a lot of them are from the 70s and 80s. So it's like browsing my library is like hit or miss.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I want to say that I have to keep track of it somewhere so that I always have. So I think I want to say it's like 1,000 books in the want to read. But that means I always have something, right? Because like 4 years ago, I added books to that list. And sometimes I'll scroll back, I'll do the list. So it's like reverse added. So the ones that I added years and years ago when I first started my Goodreads account, I'm reminded, oh yeah, I never did read that book, but I really wanted to. But the other thing is you said your kids can read anything. Mm-hmm. And that is something when you were looking at my Goodreads list, you said, you count everything. You count cookbooks, you count comic books. And it's like, yeah, I think that's key to feeling enjoying reading is that anything counts. And in my mind, audiobooks count as well. I don't always remember to put them on Goodreads, but I do. Anything counts. What do you think?
No, I agree. So that was always just like my mental hang up. If I read like a kid's book, because so my son is 9 and he's starting to read chapter books. And so I like to read them as well, just so, we can talk about it and stuff. And I used to feel like, but that book only took me an hour to read, so it doesn't really count. Or if I read a graphic novel, that doesn't really count. I was just hung up on what counted as actually a book that I would read. But then you were like, yeah, but it's just a way for me to keep track of I've read this. And I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. I should actually just record everything I read.
Yeah, and you can put them in shelves for specific kids, read with Rowan, mm-hmm. right? And then you would know the books you guys had read together. And I bet in years, he'll love to see that list. Because I have the experience from my childhood. I read a lot of novels. I was super into Anne of Green Gables in 6th grade. But I will remember kind of the storyline, but not remember what book it came from. And I don't have anybody to ask. Mm-hmm. That's why I love the idea of keeping track of it in the app, is so that I can go back. And I think that's a big thing, is that people just don't count. A lot of people will read knitting books that are full of words and information and not count that, or cookbooks. I like to read all the words in a cookbook.
Yeah.
I love it when they have chapter introductions and they talk all about skills and how to make an amazing loaf of bread. I just love to read that, and I count it, because also the whole reading a certain number of books, in my mind, it only matters to me. Mm-hmm. I talk about it because people ask me about it, but I'm not doing it for anyone else.
Yeah.
Right. So if someone was if there was some outside measurement, I don't think I would count cookbooks and comic books, and yeah, it all counts. I think that's just huge, because once you let it count in your brain, then you can kind of just go crazy down whatever rabbit hole you want to go down.
Right. Whether you want to read and no judgment about what you want to read, whether you're reading fantasy or whether you're reading romances, whatever you're reading is totally fine. And if you like children's books, or if you like young adult books, I think it was Gretchen Rubin who talks about her love of young adult novels, and that kind of was like, oh, like I've always just really enjoyed YA, but like I wouldn't put that in Goodreads because I'm like, oh, someone's gonna judge me that I've read like Twilight 4 times or whatever. Like, and I'm just like, you know what?
I'm so judging you.
That's fine. Like, but you're allowed to. And I'm like, I don't care. Like, I just had to get over. And I think also I was not discouraged from reading as a kid, but like I read a lot as a kid, like a lot. And my parents would be like, maybe you should go outside. So I think like I just had like still like hangups about like, oh, you shouldn't read too much. Like you're a nerd or you're antisocial or you're just like, I don't know, somehow less
like a slacker.
Yeah.
Like so my childhood, my mom would, as punishment, not let me read, and instead I would need to go do like house stuff, right? Like weed the garden or dishes or something. And so when I got married, I would be like, want to read but feel like I should do something around the house. And Jay is like, no, like read. Like reading is valuable, like, but it had been devalued. And then so like the 4 years of college felt like a massive reading binge. And of course my degree's in French lit, so that was like a new book every week for school. And then over the summer I would just read like everything. And I had told myself, though, it's specifically because I'm in school. Like once I become an adult, I'm going to have to act like an adult. And adults don't lay in their bed all day Saturday and read. But then Jay was like, I think you should definitely lay in bed all day and read if that's going to be the thing you want to do. He's like, you don't mess, like you're not upset with me when I play video games. So like, why would I be mad at you if you read? And it's just perfect because video games and reading like go hand in hand, right? He can be doing that and entertained. I can be in the same room and reading, and we're like spending time together, but both doing what we want to do.
Yeah.
You know?
And I also recently read, I think it was on Twitter, this quote that like reading is the greatest life hack of all time. Like you are basically, especially when you're like reading nonfiction, you are taking, someone has spent like years and years researching this topic and writing a novel, and you are spending 3 hours then absorbing that information. Like it's amazing. A lot of like really successful people super value reading books. Like that's a huge priority to them. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to feel bad about this anymore. Like this is my life. Like I only get one life. Like I'm going to read everything I can get my hands on.
Exactly. And I feel like it's a way of like your life circumstance might not allow you to travel as much as you want or meet as many new different people as you want. Reading is the way to do that. And it's also like for an introvert, it's the way to do that without having to like actually deal with people. Mm-hmm. So it's perfect. You can get all different kinds of perspectives and get inside other people's heads and see what their life is like and, you know, do it in your PJs.
Yeah. So I sort of fell out of the reading habit maybe like 3 years ago. And so the thing that got me back to like making it a huge priority was that article called The Tail End, which we can link to in the show notes. And it basically talks about kind of quantifying how many of the thing you have left in life. So if you read, I know it's depressing, but if like, let's say I'm 30 and I might live for 60 more years. If I read 5 books a year, I have 300 books left to read. I don't want to just have 300 books left to read. But if I read 100 books a year and I have 60 years left, I have what, like 6,000 or something books left to read. So just like even adding like 1 more book or 2 more books a year, like over your lifetime, you're going to read a lot more books. And so that's what made me kind of want to commit to this 100 books a year thing. Because I was just like, even if I don't hit it, like I just want to have so many more books left to read in my lifetime. And if I'm only reading 5 a year, like I don't have that.
Totally. I love that. That's such a good way of thinking about it. While we were talking about counting everything, I wanted to mention our friend Leonie Dawson reads she's read 200 books a year this year, and she's going for 300. And that's because she counts all the books she reads with her daughters. And she's homeschooling her 2 daughters who are like 5 and 7. And she reads lots of romance. And when she's written about how she's read so much, she's like, guys, like I read trashy novels that take me an hour to read. Plus I read kids books, like little kids books. Plus I read homeschooling, like, so everything, right? She counts everything, including like whatever history book she's teaching from for her kids. And I just, I love that. And then, part of homeschooling is reading just tons with your kids about whatever they're interested in. And so, yeah, so if you think 100's a lot, I'm like, her goal is 300.
If I counted books I read to my kids, they're more reading independently now, but my list would have been like Goodnight Moon 5 times a night for 5 years. Like, I used to read the same books.
The same book every time you read it.
Okay.
You can definitely, like, if you're going, like you said, to the library every week. It's so cute, though. When I'm in the library and the little kids are coming out, they'll have, like, a stack this big. Because, of course, the books are all, like, big, thick. Not thick, but thick covered.
Yeah.
And they're like, their stack is huge every week.
Yeah. I do wish I had kept track because it would be nice, like, to recommend books to you. Like, I can tell you the books I've read like a zillion times. Like, we have a handful of those and we still own them. But to think about all of the books I read, I mean, I read to my kids, we must have read 3 books a day, every day for the first 4 years of their lives. Like, I must have read so many books.
That's like 3 books a day for, let's just say, 300 days out of the year is 900.
Yeah, times 4. That's like 3,600 books.
Right.
Some of them would have been repeats, but it would have been nice to keep track of them. Like, because we read every single day because bedtime. That's part of our bedtime routine. Now my kids are older. My husband reads them chapter books. So they are currently co-reading the Skullduggery Pleasant series. And he's read things like The Hobbit. He's read Ready Player One. Like, my husband loves to read his big chapter books. But when they were little, it was my job. And so, yeah, we used to read picture books. And it was always multiple picture books. And I used to do it before nap time. So then it was twice a day. It would have been nice to keep track of all those books. So if you're kind of hesitant about like, oh, I don't want to keep track of like kids' books because they don't really count, like, do it, because that's would have been great to look at. And I wish Goodreads had a way of counting how many times you read it, because it would have been really funny to see what was the most read book.
I know they need to add that, right? Because I go back, like we were talking about recently, I went back to read Martha Beck's like Finding Your Own North Star, but I was using Goodreads when I read it the first time. So it was already in there in like 2010. And I'm like, I want to, but I have, this won't solve the problem of you reading the same book multiple times a day, but I have a shelf for each year that I add books to. So like it will be in both my 2010 shelf and my 2018 shelf. But like Goodreads doesn't count it as one of the 100 books I read this year because they're just looking for the books that moved from like in my read pile this year. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So like they definitely need a little button for like read again, read again, read again. So we talked about how to read with kids. We talked about how we keep track of what we read. I did have something else I wanted to ask you, and I've totally forgotten. Oh, competition. So you told me, you tell the audience what you told me about. You are paying attention to what I read on Goodreads.
Yes. So when I brought this episode up to Tara, I was like, oh, I noticed that you hit 100 books. And she kind of looked at me. I was like, well, I kind of stalk you on Goodreads because on Goodreads, you can friend people. And if your friend has a reading challenge set up, you can just look at their reading challenge. And so it always tells me like, oh, Tara's read 99 books or whatever. And I said, I like to try and stay ahead of her because we've always been really neck and neck. And so like, if Tara's getting close, like, I'll read something quickly and just buffer out my lead.
I love it. Well, and what I like about that is because it shows you that there's like competition, healthy competition, right? Just where you're tracking something really measurable and then trying to stay in front of it can be great for goals. And I like love that as a just like another way for you to kind of almost be like accountable to yourself. Because you're like, well, Tara's going to read 100 books this year, and that's my goal too. So I've got to stay in front of her if it's going to happen.
Right.
Right. So the good thing I didn't slack this year, and I'm only at like 40, or else screwed.
Right. I think it's only fun for me because we were so close, and it wasn't like a race, like I want to get there first. It was just a fun thing for me to just always keep track. Cause I have other friends on there and they've read like 18 books or whatever. It was just cause you were always so close to me that I noticed it one time. Yeah. So speaking of our goal, my original goal was 104 books, which was an average of 2 books a week. And because I hit that, end of August, I've upped my goal to, I think it's 154, which is an average of 3 books a week. And I have to read, I just figured it out this morning. I think I have 44 left, and so I'd have to read an average of 2.5 books for the rest of the year to meet that. So I don't know if I will, and I'm certainly not going to be disappointed if I don't. Sometimes with the holidays, I can either read a lot more or read a lot less. I just have so many good books on my shelves at the moment that I'm like, you know what? Let's push myself to read a little bit more.
I love it. I love it so much. And you asked me about my goal the other day, and I was like, because we can have kids come at any point, I have no more goals, like on any part of my life until January. I will tell you that the thing that I think made this year go faster because, okay, so in 2012, I read 100 books too, but I hit it like in December. And then in the past years, it's been like 50 to 70 books. And I think the reason is because I read a book at the beginning of the year called Tolstoy and the Purple Chair, and it's kind of a self-indulgent book, but the author, like, I think she lost her sister and she was like grieving and it had been months, and I guess she's not employed, like that's why I say self-indulgent, because I don't really know how she did it, and her kids were in school, so she set the goal for a whole year to read a book a day.
Wow.
And like and she had a blog that she updated, and of course that's how she got the book deal. And once I read that book, I was like, I've been thinking too small. And like, although I didn't, I was like, it would be insane to set that. Like I have the whole business to run and like things to read for business, like online and podcasts to listen to and like other ways I like to learn. If I was going to cut myself off of all other media, maybe I could do that. Pre-babies. Like, I don't know that, like, I don't want to stop listening to podcasts when I'm in my car. Also, I don't have public transportation. Like, when you said you're in the train for an hour, I was like, oh, that sounds so amazing. Because I don't have a commute, but just running errands and being in the car. And like, when I'm in the car with Jay, it's like, I don't read because that would be rude. Well, he talks to me. So like, it rude because I'd be like, shh. So yeah, but just something about her doing that and her having that goal, like shifted kind of how I thought about it. Cause she talked about how she find the time for it, how she read all the time, like in different places. So it's part of the reason I wanted to do this episode with you is to help shift people's perspective, the way that sometimes you read something or hear something and you realize like, oh, if I wanted to do, I could do way more. No pressure to read more if you don't want to read more. But if you're looking at like you're reading and you're like, I just wish I had more time for this, or I wish I was, I wish I was like accessing more business knowledge through business books, or I wish I was like escaping more with fiction, you totally can. You can always read a little bit more. Like the number is unimportant.
Yeah.
It's a book a day, or it's 3 books a week, or it's 1 book a month. Like I have several friends with young kids who their goal is like 1 adult book a month.
Yeah.
And that's like, that makes them like get their alone time each night to read like a chapter before they fall asleep.
Yeah. So this is my first year actually tracking what I've read on anything, but on Goodreads in particular. I never really got into it before. And again, like I wish I had, because I have read so many books over the past few years, especially business books, that I'm like, I can remember the content, but I don't know the title or authors. So I do wish I had kept track of those better. But again, I was reluctant to do Goodreads because I thought, if I make public what I read, people will judge me. And I was just like, I don't want everyone to know what I read. But I've gotten over that. Like, honestly, if someone's going to be like, well, I don't like Joeli anymore because she read XYZ, then like, fine. So I was able to kind of just release all those things. So that's kind of why I'm upping my goal, because I am curious, like, what can I do in a year without like really pushing myself, so that next year I can either decide to match it or push further. So I'm just curious, like, what do I actually read in a year? Because I have never tracked it. The other thing that helped me, particularly when I had kids, is the Kindle app on my phone. I would grab moments if I'm waiting somewhere. I'm like, and I don't want to pull out a book. Like if I'm in like the doctor's office, I will read on my phone. everywhere I can. And that's another way of just getting a page or 2 pages. And maybe you have some rules like, well, I can only read if I have time to read a full chapter, or I can, I can only read if I have 30 minutes, an hour. Like, think about some of those excuses that come up for you about like why you don't read, and see if they're actually true, because often like you can just read a page. So those are our tips for reading more. I would love to know, do you keep track of how many books you've read, or have you got a goal for this year, or has this inspired you to read more? You can come over to our Facebook group and leave a comment, or tag us on social media. Make a Instagram stories and tag us. I'm at Joeli Creates and Tara is at Tara Swiger, or the podcast account is at Take Care Pod.
Also, in the show notes, we will link up our Goodreads accounts, so you can go find us on Goodreads, our Instagram account, and the Facebook group. So if you're watching this on YouTube, it'll just be below. If you're listening on the audio show, go click. So if you want to see our shelves, what we actually read out of that 100, what those 100 books look like, go check us out there. And I just realized mine goes all the way back to how many books I read each year. I have shelves all the way back through 2010.
That's amazing.
I know. And it looks like in 2015 and 2016, I also read 100 books, and I just totally forgot that. I thought I had done it since 2012. But yeah, it's also, I just love it because it's a really great way of recommending books to people, because people will say, oh, you talked about X. What books would you recommend? Well, I can just search Goodreads for what, because otherwise I don't remember. Yeah. So check us out on Goodreads, on Instagram, and our Facebook group if you're not there anymore. And thank you so much for listening.
Have a great day, guys. Bye.